Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming despite the strike. It's it's wonderful to see so many people so interested in protracted refugee situations. I'm going to look at issues and sort of pull in some data from the project that Jennifer Hyman and I have been involved in together. This project is entitled The Globalization of Refugee Situations, Somali and Afghan Refugees. And we're going to talk about 4 issues. One, I will talk about sort of context-specific research in itself, but in particular education. And I'll also address gender relations in refugee situations, in protracted refugee situations. Jennifer's going to follow up talking about the feminization of refugees, and the 4th area, legal moral aspects of protracted refugee situations. Our project was funded by SSHRC, and we're just in the process now of analyzing our data. The research was carried out in some Somali refugees in Kenya and Afghan refugees in Iran. We see a need to push beyond traditional paradigms that are based on international relations theory and humanitarian approaches to more context-specific research and broader-based analyses and arguments that can potentially reveal more about long-term refugee situations, set the groundwork for accessing the voices of refugees, and begin to really ameliorate their situations. The problem with humanitarianism is that it has mainly focused on defining what people need without asking them, rather than figuring out ways to ask people what they want and determining with them how best to supply it, notwithstanding the complicated set of power relations therein. Our research project addressed the 2 cases that I mentioned, Somalis in Kenya and Afghans in Iran. Fieldwork, interviews, focus groups, and other archival research was carried out between 2006 and 2008 in Kenya and Iran. In both cases, the return to country of origin has been greatly hampered, as you well know, by ongoing militarized conflicts. Not surprisingly, the 2 principal issues that were raised by refugees in both sites were security and access to education. And I'm going to focus on the latter, education. Jennifer and I have both been inspired by the excellent fieldwork interviews carried out for this project by Cindy Horst in Kenya and Afsaneh Ashrafi in Iran. Cindy Horst, who assisted us with the interviews in Kenya, argued as follows: it's a myth that giving refugees too many opportunities will encourage them to stay in the refugee camp. Those who have been able to develop themselves and have gained education and skills will want to go back to contribute to their own country if conditions allow. Afsaneh Ashrafi in Iran concludes that when there is little or nothing to return to, it doesn't really matter how difficult one's life is in exile. Refugees will stay where there is more security. She said, the Iranian government, after 20 years of having tolerated Afghans with little international support, is now trying to induce repatriation by making life in Iran increasingly difficult and expensive for Afghans. On the other hand, Afghans endure the pressure as much as they can because they see no prospects for security and livelihood in Afghanistan. In such circumstances, Afghans have made a decision between the bad and the worse. They've opted to remain in Iran as long as they can find work and support their families, even if they are deprived of basic rights and live an unsettled life day to day. All our respondents in Iran had high aspirations for education of their children and hoped that they could continue their education in Iran. However, they found school fees a financial burden, especially those families with several school-aged children. Some regretted the fact that their children or even themselves had not had an opportunity to attend school, or that they had discounted their education due to economic pressures in Afghanistan or Iran. More educated respondents hoped their children would get at least the same level of education as parents. Some wished their children could access the same education as Iranian children. Most saw education for children as a route to having a better life than parents. Many wished that there were better facilities for schooling of refugee children in Iran, or that the Iranian government would reduce the registration fees for refugee children. A very small number of Afghans were able to continue to higher education due to the were able to continue to higher education due to the entrance exam and the quota system, which made it difficult for them to compete with Iranians. In recent years, the economic constraints as well as new restrictions have made it almost impossible for Afghans to enter Iranian universities.